Good morning, church. I hope that you've all had a good week and are staying safe. I'm going to introduce my talk this week with a little bit of scripture. It's from Colossians 3 and it's verses 12 to 15. And it says this, since your God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. For as members of one body, you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. And it's that topic of thankfulness that I wanted to talk to you about today, because at times like this, Phil covered the Easter topic really beautifully last week and talked about the way in which we are going through a time of difficulty, and that we grow through those times, but it's tough and hard to endure. And being thankful can sometimes feel like the furthest thing from our minds. I was reflecting on the news that's been out about the Apollo 13 50th anniversary, and I know that's going to seem a little bit left of field, but bear with me, I'll bring it back. The Apollo 13 mission, if you weren't familiar, it was a failure. It was meant to be the third landing on the moon, and instead of landing on the moon, they had a problem. They weren't able to land. They had to come back, and it was skin of the teeth stuff. It was really difficult. The thing that I find so amazing about the Apollo 13 mission is that it's kind of contrary to everything else that NASA did at that time. Apollo was a success because of the practice. They practiced and practiced and practiced and got to the point that they understood everything that was happening, when it was happening, why it was happening, and there were no stones left unturned. They practiced every eventuality they could think of, and it was successful. They did amazing things. The greatest thing of the 20th century, landing on the moon, some would say. But Apollo 13 threw that all out the window. There you have a group of people that have got to really figure out an awful lot in a short amount of time in order to get those astronauts home safely. The thing that I was reflecting on and that I find interesting is there was an interview with the commander of the mission, Jim Lovell, and he was saying how in the early days NASA really felt that it was something that they didn't want to talk about. It was a very public failure. They'd only just made it. It was nothing to be celebrated, and they just wanted to move on and get to the next successful mission as quickly as possible. And so equally for the astronauts, they felt very sad about the fact they hadn't had the opportunity to land on the moon and do this amazing thing that they'd trained so hard for. And so, the overwhelming feeling afterwards was negativity. And yet, in more recent years, especially after the film, I think, maybe just because Tom Hanks has such a beautiful face, but more likely because I think it really brought home just what an achievement it was for them to get those astronauts home, how close it came, and just how hard they worked to make that happen. And the way that they all pulled together as a team. There are interviews where they talk about the fact that the word I was barely heard. It was we, us, everyone pulled together to make that happen. And as they look back, they were part of that. They made that happen. And for the astronauts, okay, they didn't land on the moon. They didn't succeed in that, but they succeeded in surviving against unbelievable odds. And they did that with the backing of their crew and their people supporting them back home. And I see, so much to reflect on in that with where we are right now. It's happened. It's that news has come out and that anniversary has landed at such an opportune moment, because for us, we are in a place where we are really dependent on each other in a way that we never have been before. And we are aware of that in a way that we never have been before. We have been a very individualistic, some would say selfish society. And that's starting to change. People are realising just how much we need one another. and from Thursday evenings going out and giving a round of applause to the NHS, to recognising the hard and amazing work that people are doing in supermarkets, in delivery companies and producers and in charity organisations, just to keep things rolling, just to keep things moving forward, because we are all in this fight together. And for some of us, that means we stay out of the way and we let other people do what they need to do and help them stay safe by doing that. For others, it's that they work absolutely tirelessly to help as many people as possible. And that's an amazing thing. It's hard to say that it's something that we're thankful for right now, but I think it will be something that we're thankful for when we look back. It's also a reminder, we are supporting each other in so many ways, and we need to make sure we keep doing that. There are people that were relying on us before, and now that we're out of routine, it might be easy to forget about some of those things as well. And I'm thinking particularly about certain charities that we would have supported, our children in the compassion program that we would have sponsored, would have been sponsoring, and all of that's still going on. All of that is still there, and these people are needing us more than ever in some cases. So it's important that we keep track of the people that we have historically supported and make sure that we go on supporting them. And it's important that we do that and look for opportunities and ways that we can do that for more people at this time, and look for the people that need the most support in order to support them. And that support can come in many forms. I've talked about charities, and financial aid and giving for some of those charities right now is so important because they're losing cash, but they're also working really hard. The YMCA springs to mind on that front, with the shops being closed, and yet they've got more demand than ever, and more people reaching out to them for help, and they are fighting really hard through that, and they need our support. But similarly, with each other, sending messages of support is so important. Reminding one another that we are part of that bigger family, and just the love that we all have for each other as a family. It's something that we comment on, and that we are. It's so easy to see when we're all together, and we need to keep that up at a time like this when we're all not able to be face to face. So fighting all of that and trying hard to support one another in that way, and then also prayer. That prayer is just one of the most important ways that we can support one another. And for some of us, praying is easier than ever. Some of us, praying is harder than ever, and we've all got our challenges in that regard. But it's important that we don't stop praying for each other, and it's also important that we don't stop listening to God, which is really where I'm going next. And in that regard, I wanted to reflect on Exodus 16. So I'm not going to read it verbatim. So I really would encourage you to go and have a read of it. But Exodus, right the way through, I talked about Exodus actually the last time I spoke at church on the last Sunday that we were all together. And it's stuck in my mind ever since then, because it's a story about the Israelites being in really uncertain times, coming out of a familiar situation. Sure, they were oppressed, and they didn't have freedom. They certainly didn't have free will in Egypt, but they knew where they were at least. And God took them out of that situation. He led them out of that situation with Moses and Aaron, and took them out. And they faced off against the Egyptian army and escaped from them. And then by the time you get to Exodus 16, things are starting to sink in a little bit for them. And it reminds me of where we're getting to now. The news is talking about how long we're going to be socially isolating for, and how long these measures are going to go on for. And just the same way, the Israelites are looking at their situation and realising life's never going to go back to the way that it was. Things aren't going to go back to normal for them. They've left their homes, and they are in the middle of nowhere. They're in the middle of the wilderness, and they are dependent on God like never before. And they're getting hungry. And that's the thing that really starts to turn it, is when they start to worry about where their next meal's coming from. And they start to grumble at Aaron and Moses. And so Moses talks to the Lord, and the Lord is kind of saying, well, don't they realise that when they're grumbling at you, they're actually moaning at me? Like, they're discontent with what I'm doing here, not with what you're doing. They've got to be a bit more faithful. They've got to learn to follow my lead a bit better. And he says, look, I'm going to prove that I'm in control of this situation. I'm going to give all the food that you need. You're going to have meat in the evening and then bread in the morning. So tell them that they've got all the food they need, but also be aware of this. I am looking to see how well you can follow my instructions through this time. And it's just really interesting the way that the two come together. I'm in control and I'm going to prove it, and I'm going to see how well you can follow my lead. So one thing leads to another. Moses tells them about this, and then the evening comes, they're all in the camp together and presumably wondering what's going to happen. But, other than that, just kind of sitting around, I guess. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there is a deluge of quail. The camp is absolutely covered in all of these quail, and they haven't got a clue what's going on. And the scripture only gives it like one sentence, but I love it. The mental image that I get when I think about that camp swarmed by quail, it just makes me chuckle every time. So they got their meat, and then the next morning they wake up and the camp is surrounded by this dew on the grass, and as it dries it turns into this food called manna, and God has provided this food, but the Israelites are looking at it going, what is this? What are we supposed to do with this? What is it? And Moses is going, remember, he said he was going to feed you? Like, this is it. This is the food. And they're like, oh, right, what? So Moses tells them to collect it. Collect as much as you need, and you're not going to go hungry. You're going to have everything that you need. God will provide. And they collect this stuff. Some people collect a bit more than they should. Some people collect less. Some people collect only what they need. The ones who collect too much have got nothing. The ones that collect just what they need have got ample. And yeah, they're fed. God lives up to his word 100%. And then, of course, the next thing that's going to happen is people who have got some left over are going to look at that and go, I don't really know if I want to trust God, so I'm going to store some of that for the next day. So that's exactly what they do. They hoard it away, and they wake up the next morning and it's gone off, and it's full of maggots and it smells, which is, three delightful things. And they they look at that and go, oh, God, that's awful. But at least we're in a place where actually God had come through for us. The food is there, just as he said it was going to be. We've got nothing to worry about. So brilliant, I'm going to have some more food. And they collect again and again and again. And, they get into this habit day after day after day. And on the sixth day, Moses says, right, God is going to have a day of Sabbath tomorrow. God says we need to not collect food tomorrow. So therefore, we need to collect enough that we have enough for today and tomorrow. So collect twice as much as normal, use whatever you want for today, and then you will have ample left for tomorrow. And of course, all the Israelites, they're going, well, hang on a minute, we tried this. We tried storing it overnight, and that didn't work. We had mouldy, maggoty, smelly bread the next day. That was not a great experience. But Moses is like, well, this is what God has said, so this is what we're going to do. So next morning comes along, and of course, everything is fine. The bread's fresh, it's lovely, it's fine to eat. So they've got all the food they need for that Sabbath day. And finally, the thing that is going to happen happens, and some of the Israelites go out and, harvest this stuff once again, or try to harvest this stuff once again on the Sabbath. But of course, there's none there, because God said there's not going to be any there. And he said not to do it, and yet they've got out and done it anyway. And that bit makes me laugh especially hard, because 6 days ago, these Israelites were in a position where they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what this was all about, and they were wondering what God was doing. But 7 days later, on the seventh day, they're now so in the habit of doing that, they're out doing it anyway. Regardless of whether God says to do it or not, they're going to go and try and collect some manna. And it just really reflects the way that we can be as human beings sometimes, that we get into this routine and we want to just carry on doing the same thing. Anyway, I digress. Like I say, I recommend having a read of it. But there are a few things that I draw from that. The first thing is we have to be mindful that we've handed our lives over to God. As Christians, we have given God authority over us, and we are we are under his hand. And that means that when we're going through a situation and there's lots going on and there's stuff happening that we don't necessarily like, if we're grumbling and we're not trusting what God has, that God's got things under control, then we're in just the same place as those Israelites. We're moaning to God, and we need to be clear on that God has a plan. Just the same as Jesus on the boat during the storm. He wakes up and he says, "What's wrong? Have faith. It's all okay. God's got it. You don't need to worry." It's exactly the same thing. So it's difficult. It's not always that easy. And during times of real hardship that we're going through at the moment as a church, it's not easy to practice that. It's not easy to say, I know that God's got it, and have confidence that God is going to be in full control of all of this. But he is. He's in full control of everything. God he's not put off by the fact that we're not in familiar circumstances. He's not put off by the fact that we can't do the things in the way that we're used to being able to do them. He doesn't depend on that familiarity like we depend on it. For him, he's just as able to work effectively today as he was able to work effectively 2 months ago. And we need to remember that as his people. God is not in a place where he can't get stuff done like we are. God is moving just as rapidly as he ever was, if not more rapidly, because of what's happening. The final thing really is two things: having faith in God and having faith in his instructions. The thing that we see through this is this isn't a story about a faithful people that are protected by God because of their faith. Time and time again, they didn't have faith. They collected food when they didn't need to because they should have had faith. They went out and tried to collect food when they shouldn't have done because they didn't have faith. Time and time again, they didn't listen to what God was telling them. And yet God was there for them and looked out for them because God is a good father. And because he committed himself to those people and said that he was going to bring them through that situation. For us, God speaks to us. God has a word for us. God has instructions for us in just the same way. And it's important at a time like this more than ever in some ways that we are listening to him. And I talked about prayer earlier on and praying for each other, but being close to God and listening for his word and following his lead is also really, really, really important at this time. And the Exodus story really shows us that. So the thing I think I want to say in conclusion is that being thankful is not necessarily something that's meant to come easily. Just like the Apollo astronauts, for whom it's taken 50 years to get to a place where they really look back and are thankful for what they went through and thankful for how it all happened. Sometimes being thankful takes a little bit of time. It also takes a little bit of practice on our part, that we clothe ourselves in the promises that God has made us, and that we remember just how faithful God always has been to us, and that we reflect that faithfulness back to him. And I just wanted to finish a little bit weirdly maybe by reading that same scripture once again, because for me, thinking about it in the context that we're in, it was meaningful in a different way. So once again, Colossians 3, verses 12 to 15. And I just want you to have a think about, how this talks about us being together as a family and a body, and also us being God's people and following God's lead. So, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. For as members of one body, you are called to live in peace. And always be thankful. Thanks very much.